Welcome. So today we're going to look at dyeing, as in colouring things. um, we get asked lots of questions, and probably all of the they boil down to the most commonly asked questions are around dyeing, how to do it, various issues that come up with it. So we're just going to give a basic dyeing 101 tutorial, so cover all those questions. I know there's a little bit of hesitancy out there. I meet it with customers all the time. People ask me for leather that's already been pre-dyed, particularly in the veg tan. Now we have lovely leathers that are pre-dyed. We have the cognac, the dark brown and the black. Really lovely. Nice leathers if you want to do that. But being prepared to dye is just going to open up a whole other kind of world for you, and it's going to make some of your leathercraft a little bit more inexpensive, because instead of having to have each of those 3 shoulders or pieces, you can have one natural piece and dye it to the colours that you want as and when you need it. It is a bit daunting, I'm not going to lie. I can see why it's daunting. You've done all this work, maybe lots of tooling and things, and then the idea of sort of putting dye onto it can seem a bit scary, and you don't want to kind of, ruin your leather either. Getting past this is what we're all about today. I'm going to start with the top 10 tips. So, number 1, store your items correctly, store your dyes correctly. Majority of them will really not tolerate going below 0, being below freezing point. So think about where they're stored. If you live in Derbyshire, particularly if you live in Buxton like I used to, just think about it. We know it gets cold up there. Don't get them too warm either. So ideally you don't want them any more than about 15 degrees. So don't store them somewhere near a radiator. I recently redesigned my room and I got these fantastic drawers everywhere for storage. Realised I put my dyes in the drawer. It's a wheelie one, so I could wheel it away, but it was a bit too near the radiator, so I've rejigged my layout. Not too warm, not too cold. Just think about where you store them. A plastic crate that you can just put them all in together and put the lid on is quite a good idea. It keeps the air content as well down to a minimum. Excuse me. Second, point 2, wash your hands before you handle your leather. So those of you who are watching one of my videos the other day, I demonstrated in the little blooper section at the end what can happen when you've got grease on your hands. I'd, in an act of utter vanity, decided my hands look a bit old lady-ish and put hand cream on just before the video, and my fingers had touched the veg tan and I couldn't see it, it was invisible, but it caused a blockage when I came to do the dyeing on the video. So I have washed my hands today. My fingernails are still pretty dirty, but apparently that's becoming my catchphrase, so think about your hands. Shake your bottles well. This is number 3. Shake your bottles well before you start. And most of the products have a mixture of things in to help them kind of work, particularly things like these water stains. They have a small amount of wax as well as the different kind of particles held together. So you want to really give them a good shake, get everything mixed up together so that you're getting a flat, your flat colour without any separation from the bottle. Where are we at? 4. Tip a little bit of the product into a dish. I like to use these little glass dishes, but I also have some takeaway little pots. So tip some in. You can put a small amount in, you can always go back to it afterwards, but it really makes a big difference. If you take it out of the top of the bottle, you're likely to get residue collecting around the top lid. So if I was to kind of go like this on the top of the bottle, the chances are I would get some darker areas, some kind of sticky stuff and bits. And as I go down, I'm just going to transfer that in onto the leather. So pour it in, shake it well, leave it a little bit to settle, pour a little bit into the dish and then use. That brings us on to point number 5. Don't pour the contents back into the bottle. So we have little airborne particles with little, quite mild airborne bacteria all around, just natural things. And you'll be transferring some of those back into the bottle, and which can cause the contents to contaminate over time. If you've ever had a really old bottle and you've opened it and the smell is a bit weird, that's quite often what's happened. Somebody's tipped it back in. We don't like waste, so there's other ways around it. Top tip. If you get a Ziploc bag and you get your applicators and your dye dish, pop it into the Ziploc bag, press as much of the air out as you can, seal it. You can actually leave that for a good couple of days, as long as it's not too hot, to go back to and reuse both your sponge applicators and your dish. It should keep it from drying out too much, and that will save your wastage. But don't put it back in the bottle. Okay, so number 6. No, 6. Use a good applicator. Not all applicators are the same. Use one that's fit for the purpose that you're doing. Now, these daubers are the most traditional thing you ever see on Leathercraft websites, including ours. It's probably our best-selling item, to be honest. They are fantastic. They're made of sheep's wool. I think that they're best for edges and for going into sort of really awkward corners, particularly when you're redyeing garments and clothing and you want to be a bit more controlled. If you're doing a larger area, I tend not to use them, and the reason for that being is if you push your finger through here, you can actually feel the end of the wire. Now, when you're doing a larger area, there can be a tendency to lean into it a little, and if you do, you can end up inadvertently scratching the leather through the dauber. So I prefer to use a sort of sponge type applicator. On the website, we have these ones here. These are foam covered in a cloth, and they can be rinsed out and washed. So those are the premium applicator pads. We also have just some cheaper sponges. This one I've cut in half. I tend to cut them into halves or quarters, depending what size I'm doing and what control I want, just to make them go further. And again, they can be squeezed out, washed, and reused, as long as you do it quick and they haven't gone dry and crispy. And then, as per the other video, this is the cut and use foam pad, which is my latest, applicator of preference. The reason for thinking about it is that the applicators will give you movement of the dye material onto the leather, and what you don't want is to have anything that leaves kind of streaks or marks on the top surface. So you want something that's got a high density to it and is going to allow that material to move easily. So that's your applicators. Ensure, this is number 7. Ensure you're working on a good clean area. Might sound obvious, but you don't want it to pick up any other dirt or dust. If you've just been skiving and then you go straight to dyeing, you're likely to pick up those little dust particles. You're going to get lumps in your dyeing. It's not going to look right. So use a piece of foil, use a piece of greaseproof paper, clean your area, get it down, cover your surfaces, and get it a clean starting point. And midway through dyeing, just pay attention. You don't want to be dyeing the front of something, like the front flap of a wallet or something, and turning over and then picking up dye transfer onto that bit you've just dyed. So keep some sheets handy, just move them into place to cover over any muck you've made, so that you're always starting from a clean point. Keep a piece, this is number, where are we up to? 8. Keep a clean cloth. I like to keep a clean cloth and a dish of water handy. Just keep some kitchen roll, just something handy so you can mop things up. You've just got it there. If too much dye goes on the surface, you can immediately grab it, wipe it back. So always just a good tip to have that handy. Now, once the dye is dried, well, this is tip 9, but it is 9? I can't count today. But it is the most important one. And if you remember nothing else from today's tutorial, remember this: buff. You do need to buff the leather once the dye is dried. It doesn't matter what kind of dye it is, whether it's water-based or solvent or whatever. Dyes for leather are designed to react with the chemical fibres in the collagen. They're either reacting with the surface or a bit further down, but they're designed to react and bond. Any other material that hasn't bonded will be sat on the top surface. Now, water evaporates, solvents evaporate, no difference there. But the dye pigment material, it's difficult to judge it. You're never going to get it 100% perfect. There's going to be a little bit of material left. And that's where any dye transfer can happen. Not from anything else. It's just that loose material. So when you're buffing, you're just making sure you've lifted all that away. Now you can dry buff, you can damp buff to make sure. And again, if you use a clean bit of white cloth, as you're doing it, you can actually see whether you've got everything coming off until it rubs clear. So buff, rub your dyes, whatever you're doing afterwards before you apply any finish, just gives you a much better finish to the leather. If you're using these, they have a little bit of wax, so you'll be working into that as well, and you'll see a luster coming up, and the same with the antique gels. So buff, buff, buff. And lastly, number 10, do your own testing. So you will know what you want to achieve. You'll know what leathers you would like to work on, your preferred leathers. They will all take it differently. If you're using leather that's not from us, it will react a little differently to the leather I might show you. Do your own tests. If you're re-dyeing something, do your own test on a small area. You know, like when you dye your hair, it says do a patch test. Do the same if you're dyeing a coat, a sofa, a chair. Find an area underneath the bottom that you can just do a test on before you launch right in. It's just a good idea to be able to get, so you can see what results you're going to get, how the dyes are reacting. Keep a little notebook of them. Stick them in. Something that you thought didn't work for one project might be exactly the look you want for another project. If you've done it, dated it, and written the materials that you used, you'll be able to go back and see. And if you are doing your own records, while you're at it, just make a little note of the atmospheric conditions. Did you do it in the middle of winter with all your heating blazing? Did you do it in the summer with all the windows open and a cool breeze? Those things will make a difference. Did you do it when it was raining a bit and the humidity in the air was higher? Those things can make a difference. And if you want to get really technical about it, Peter will talk to you about things like pH levels as well. But we won't go down that route today. We're just dyeing 101 today. But just keep some records. It's really a useful thing to do. So there we go. Top 10 things to get you helped, to help you out with your dyeing 101.